Welcome back to the Daily Factor. Let's go to our international updates, and we start on the continent of Africa. Now, currently there are elections happening in Ethiopia. This is on the backdrop of war and famine, and especially the war that is currently happening in the Tigray region. This is going to be the first big test for Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who of course rose to power in 2018. Now joining me to discuss what is currently happening in the eastern part of the continent, I'd like to welcome EBRAHIM Deen. He's the analyst at the Afro Middle East Center. EBRAHIM, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Salam, and thanks for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. EBRAHIM, well, to describe the crisis that is currently happening in that region would be an understatement. This is a huge test for Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it's, when Abiy Ahmed rose to power in 2018, he was seen as this great reformer. As this, we saw Ethiopian society opening up, we saw the release of political prisoners, we saw him negotiate a deal with Eritrea and, received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2019. What's happened since is we've actually seen a clamping down on freedoms. We've seen the war in Tigray, which is currently continuing, very complicated issue and much more complex than many would make it out to be. But also within, Abiy Ahmed's base, the Oromia, or the Oromo. In Oromia, most of and the Oromo make up a third of the country's ethnic population. The Oromo are actually, many of them, boycotting the polls because they feel that Abiy Ahmed has become similar to many others, wants to Amharize Ethiopian society and doesn't want to actually include, and there's no inclusive political system. So, it's a very big test of his popularity, but again, he will win because, the three main Oromo political parties have boycotted. The Tigray party is not participating in the election, the TPLF, Tigray People's Liberation Front. And so, around 100 of the 500 voting stations aren't actually having elections. That's aside from Tigray. They're ruled by some sort of a military rule. So, it's very likely that Abiy Ahmed will win. The question is, what does this mean, and what will happen after this? Will he use this as a basis to open up society, or further shut down as he's currently doing since last year?
EBRAHIM, you touched on it, of course. What happens if he does go ahead and win? And as you say, it's a formality for him to go right now and win. The war in Tigray is that cloud that is currently hanging over his head, isn't it?
Tigray is one of the main issues. There's still Eritrean forces in Tigray. Ethiopian forces are still trying to crack down on the Tigray People's Liberation Front in Tigray. But bigger than Tigray, Tigray is 6% of the population. Oromia is 30%. And, the Oromo have become very disillusioned with Abiy Ahmed. Abiy Ahmed himself, Oromo. And his rise was actually fueled by the Oromo protests in the Rio Olympics. And so, what is happening there is the big issue. So there's Oromo disillusionment. The Oromo Liberation Army has actually broke off from the Oromo Liberation Front and is actually in active combat in Ethiopia. There's many other militias, hundreds of smaller militia groups operational in the country, but also there's then the issue about the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Before it was seen as Abiy Ahmed had this great legitimacy. Now he doesn't, and now we have, the abilities, Egypt and Sudan playing roles in the country, trying to actually instigate rebellion as well. So, the country currently seems to be similar to what it was a few years ago, disintegrating because of the tensions between the center and the periphery, which has always beset Ethiopian society and Ethiopia as a whole.
EBRAHIM, what's amazing about Ethiopia and also sad at the same time is that it's had such an authoritarian past. And as you mentioned, Abiy Ahmed comes in, the reforms, the potential change. This seems like 10 steps forward, but 20 steps back, what is currently happening.
It does seem currently, at least the Tigray People's Liberation Front dictatorial regime ruled for the past 30 years as part of the Ethiopian People's the Social Democratic Party. The bigger, what's happened since then, though, is, at least Ethiopia was developing. It was authoritarian, but there was economic growth. What's happened in recent years is there's a risk of famine in Tigray. Economically, the country is worse off, as well as the authoritarian system, which seems to be continuing. Abiy Ahmed says it's going to be the first democratic election, but 20% of polling stations are not running, and Tigray itself it has no election. And so, it does seem as if it's much of the same. The question, though, is will Abiy Ahmed change? And I mean, it doesn't look, it just seems as if he's getting more authoritarian. He was from the intelligence services of the TPLF and the EPRDF prior to this. So he's not necessarily a politician. And also, there is questions over his openness and inclusivity, and the fact that he is supported by the Amharic regions in the country and wants to actually centralize power.
One final question, Ibrahim. Violence has, of course, been one of those words that gets thrown around when it comes to elections, especially in Africa. Surely we're not going to see that.
I mean, no. There's no force that's capable of threatening the state. But in saying so, the conflict in Tigray is continuing. And so there is low-level violence already occurring in the country, and that's likely to continue because everyone already knows the outcome of this election.
EBRAHIM Deen, researcher and analyst at the Afro Middle East Center. We say jazakallah to you so much for joining us.
Shukran for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Well, I think the concern over so many concerns. I mean, one of them violence, the famine, the current war that's happening in Tigray. And the question we need to ask ourselves is, can we at least have one election in the eastern part of our continent where it's free of violence, and of course it will be free and fair. That's the most important part. But as Ibrahim is saying, the huge possibility of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed maintaining power is there. The question is, what does he do with regards to it? And we will be following the elections that are currently happening in Ethiopia. Well, after the break, we'll be moving to our community news. Do stay tuned.